Welcome to Straightline MTB, and today we're excited to talk about the first ride review of our beautiful Transition Sentinel V2. Thank you for joining us as we talk about first ride impressions of the brand new Transition Sentinel V2. So this is the NX model and it's a size large. And if you guys want to get like a bike check video and some more detailed specifics about what we changed and some of the components on this bike, go to our channel and check out the video that we have just made for it. So new for the V2 version of the Sentinel, Transition has made this bike longer, slacker, and they added some more travel and bumped up the progression in the rear to help with those big compression hits. So Transition touts this bike on their website as a bike that you can go do the Enduro World Series circuit and have it as an all-arounder and ride long days in the saddle. So I'm excited to show you guys what our experience is with this bike, as I've put a little bit more miles on it than I normally would for a first ride review, so we'll give you some more detailed information. So let's talk about some of the things that I noticed right away riding this bike, and I will say the biggest thing was the SBG geometry that Transition is known for. This is the first bike that I've hopped on that I really noticed something a little bit different. Now, I'm not gonna say it's a bad thing, but it was definitely a different feeling in the saddle on the climbs and the downhills, and we'll get into that. Also, the suspension package felt a little bit different than what I'm used to. Granted, this is like the RockShox Select fork and a Select Plus rear shock, where normally on the last few bikes I was riding more of top shelf, like the Manitou Mezzer and the Zeb Ultimate and the Ultimate Super Deluxe. So that could be a tribute to some of the differences that I found. But the comfort-wise, sitting in the saddle, it feels really comfortable. It came stock with a 35mm riser bar. I have changed that to a 20mm because I did feel kind of like I was sitting in it more than I would really used to. So I lowered that front end down just a little bit to get that comfort on the climbs and give a little bit more control for me, and something that I'm more used to. We've changed out the bars, went from 780mm wide bars to a 800. And that's something I'm a little bit more familiar with, but I will say, I think the 780 bar does feel really good, but I'm gonna try out these 800mm bars and see how we get along with it. Another thing I've noticed, which is actually a really great feeling, is having that 210mm dropper. That thing just disappears on this bike when you lower it. It's a really great long dropper post, and I really enjoyed having something so long. So I'm very happy to see that Transition made that seat tube super, super low. On a size large, we're running 210. We're normally on bikes we're struggling to put a 180 or 170 in some of those longer seat tubes. So that was really good feeling. So let's get into the climbing of this bike. And like we talked about, Transition kind of sets this as a bike that you can take to the Enduro World Series and you can pedal on it a long day. So I was very interested to see how this bike performed long days in the saddle. So I have taken it on our normal test loop where we have a short technical climb to the top and then just bomb down. But I have taken it one step further, and I've taken it on our cross-country trail where it's an 11-mile loop and it's a lot of up and downs, and some of those climbs will really get you. On the technical climbing, this bike performs really, really well. That rear suspension is active enough to get you up and over those bumps. It's very comfortable. I did notice there is some pedal bob when you're grunting, but I wouldn't say it's one of those pedal bobs where it's really taking away from your experience. A lot of these bigger bikes are gonna have that suspension movement. It's more of a springy feeling, kind of something similar I remember to the Nuke-Proof Mega 290 when it was locked out. But in the open position, this bike climbs really well. I think that movement does give you the traction that you need. That long wheelbase really helps you climb up. I didn't notice any of the front end wandering, so that was a very good feeling, because when you're up there grunting on some of those really steep climbs, it's good to have that traction and not have to worry about maneuvering. You know, it is a long bike, so you're gonna have to have a little bit more forethought if you're coming up on more of the turny, technical, you know, sections where you're gonna have to kind of maneuver it. But I think it clawed up really, really well, and that suspension front and rear was able to kind of support you getting up and keeping that traction down, especially with those tires. That Assegai up front and really that DHR 3C in the rear really was giving you the grip that was necessary. And then something else that was really surprising to me, especially on a bike that I think you think is really like a big bruiser of a bike, is that I went out on maybe my second run on this bike, the second day I rode this bike, and I went on that cross-country loop that I was talking about where it's, you know, up and down, technical sections, technical downs, technical ups. You know, oftentimes on a bike this size, I'd be pretty tired after it and that'd be a day for me. But instead I packed that bike up and I drove it right down to our normal test loop, our downhill track, where you climb up and bomb down. So that was really surprising to me that this bike left me with enough energy to go and do that long loop and then go and do that extra 8 miles. So that day I did about 19 miles and almost 4,000 feet of climbing. So I think that really speaks to this bike's ability to climb. And I think I'm really feeling that it's the weight. I know some of the other bikes we've been riding were about the 37, 35 pound mark, where this bike is only about a pound and a half lighter than that. It's about 33 and a half how I have it. So I think some of that weight did play into it, but I don't want to take away from the suspension and just the ability of the transition, because it's a good climber for its size. So that was very surprising and I was very happy about that. So now let's get into my favorite part, is the descending on this bike. So this bike, I will say, I'm just gonna come out and say the biggest surprising part to me of this bike was its playfulness and its ability to catch air. All right, back to it. Whoa, man. Yep, jumps. Yep, jumps. I was hitting jumps very, very easy, and a lot more easy than I expected. So coming off the Meta bikes, the AM and the TR, where those bikes are more just ground huggers and just want to plow, this bike was very happy to jump and hop and have a great time on the trail. Being a 150 millimeter rear travel bike, that wasn't something I was expecting. It really reminded me a lot of the Ripmo AF, aside from the weight, but that bike was also playful. You know, even this bike being a little bit longer than that, that was a surprise. Going into the actual downhill parts of our trail, the first part was the flowy, smooth berms and jumps. That's where this bike was a lot more fun and playful than I expected. I did notice a little bit on the flat sections where, you know, normally you're pedaling. It didn't go as fast as some of the other bikes that I was riding, where it would just on its own, just really just take off. But I really think it's down to that 30-tooth front chainring. And then this is the NX cassette. So the rear cog, the smallest one's only 11, to where I'm normally riding a 32 front, and then you'll have that XD with the 10 chainring will give you higher top speed. So that, I think that might be a change that I'm gonna make to get that speed when you're pedaling. And then going into the steep sections with the hairpin turns, another spot where this bike really shined. It has a lot of confidence. It's that long wheelbase, that travel that just gobbles up those steeps. And even in those hairpin turns, where some of the bikes that are of similar length, this bike I was able to move around a little bit more and kind of whip it. And that could be down to that SBG geometry that I'm still kind of getting used to. Not that it's a bad thing, but I did notice I was a little bit more over the front on this bike than other bikes I've been riding. It has a 40 millimeter stem on it, so I don't think I would go any shorter or any longer. Just something I got to get used to, find that sweet spot. So then taking this into my favorite trail on our test loop, it's the rocky Black Diamond Trail, where it's just loose, just nasty garbage trail. That's where this bike was somewhere else that got me a little surprised. I didn't feel it was as confident as I had expected. Yes, it's able to plow and smash, but it wasn't a bike that I felt like I was on and I was able to let it drive, similar to the Meta AM or the Nuke Proof Mega, where those bikes you can kind of just sit aboard those bikes and really just plow. Seemed like the Transition wanted you to drive a little bit more, and I think that's down to its maneuverability and its poppiness. Not bad at all. I still had an amazingly great time on this bike, but just being a little bit more thoughtful and having me pick maybe different lines, or something that I did that I actually really enjoyed was hopping off rocks to kind of miss some of the bigger stuff, which helped me go a little bit faster in some sections than others. But just something to note that, again, not a downfall to this bike, because it has its own character and it's really fun. So I'm gonna address this, and it's not the bike's fault. probably right or error, but I just recently had the biggest crash I've had in probably about 7 years since I destroyed my wrist. I was on a trail and it was, you know, one of those parts of the trail where you're like, oh, that's not even the hard part. It was a steep section. Something happened and I went over the bars and I rolled down a cliff, busted up my shoulder and blew out my hammy, and I Jimmy crack corned my helmet, so I'll be looking for a new helmet. I'll be off the bike for a few weeks, so I'll have to kind of think about that and re-examine that. But all right, so what's the quick straight line on the first ride of the Sentinel V2? Well, I'm gonna say that this bike is probably one of the few bikes that had me giggling and laughing on my first ride review. I had a blast on this bike and it was very unexpected, some of the things that it brought to the table with its playfulness, its poppiness, and its willing to just have a good time at being such a big bike and still able to handle some of that gnarly stuff. Some of the other reviews that I have seen kind of touted this as a more of an all-arounder, like maybe a traditional all-mountain bike from back about 5-6 years ago when that was even a thing. And I'm not gonna say yet, but I'm having a feeling that this is gonna be one of those few bikes that I've ridden that would be an amazing all-around bike where you could just hit it on your local trails, have a blast on smooth stuff, and still be able to take it to the bike park and hit some nasty trails. So stay tuned to our channel. I'm going to continue riding this once we heal up my shoulder that I can barely move and my ham hock here that don't want to go straight. I'm gonna ride this more. In a few weeks, we should be having a long-term full review for you guys. So if you guys have any questions about this bike, some things you want me to look at, look for, or touch on in our long-term review, comment below. Also, if you have any other questions, let us know below. And please don't forget to follow us on Straightline MTB, where you'll see a lot more stuff that we're doing and some of the cracked helmets and falls that I've been having. So that's at Straightline_MTB on Instagram. Hit us up on TikTok. We're doing some TikToks, and straightlinemtb.com. And give us a like and give us a subscribe so we can continue to bring you more stuff. And thank you for joining us, and we'll pop out on the next video.